really enjoyed the day. It was very nice to get out of Austin. As mentioned, my name is Bech Bruun. I'm one of 3 board members that serve the Texas Water Development Board. I do reside in Austin. I'm from Corpus Christi originally. Most of my professional career leading up to this role has been involved in and around the legislature, the governor's office. Also worked for the Brazos River Authority for a couple of years as a government and customer relations manager. So basically, the main things you might care to know about me or not are the fact that you probably view me as somebody from Austin, which is probably a knock to begin with. I work for the government. I'm a lawyer. I'll have to admit that as well. So you're probably wondering, does this guy have any redeeming qualities whatsoever at this point? And, oh yeah, I'm a Longhorn. Sorry about that. My dad was a list. So if I have any redeeming qualities, maybe it's the fact that at least I'm not an Aggie. And that I promise I will not go long with my remarks. We get to spend a great deal of time traveling around the state, which is very enjoyable. Just talking about our agency and what it is exactly that we do. Doug Shaw spoke earlier this morning and talked a little bit about the agency and its history. We go back to 1957 when we were created by the legislature. Our mission statement talks about us providing leadership, information, education, support for planning, financial assistance, and outreach for the conservation and responsible development of water in Texas. I like to talk a little bit about exactly what our place in the world is when we're talking about other state agencies, state government, what we do versus others. I go visit with a lot of city managers, utility directors. When we travel out into the state, a lot of times when we walk into the office in the city hall, the first question they ask me when they walk out to meet with the guy that came from Austin is, what did we do wrong? They're afraid that we're a TCEQ or that we're some sort of an EPA or government regulator that's there to tell them they did something wrong or to tell them what they need to do, and that's not us at all. The joke that Ronald Reagan and his joke about the scary words, government, we're the government, we're here to help, you set us back a long way because we really are set up to help. We're a resource agency, and I referenced our mission statement, but the main takeaways from that are the fact that we do provide financial assistance, outreach, and conservation for the development of water in Texas. So we do that through a number of finance programs that we have that we've had since our inception in the 50s. Generally speaking, the benefit to, say, a small city and coming to the Water Development Board or small town is that they're going to be able to finance money at cheaper rates to go towards those projects. We really are set up, the way our programs are set up, we really are able to help rural Texas a great deal. The board has loaned upwards of $14 billion in funds since the 50s. And if you, I'm stealing a bullet point from Doug that I know he uses a lot, he might have used it earlier. If you were to look at our loans as far as the total number of loans made by our agency, most of those, as a percentage, over 60%, have gone towards projects in rural communities. I know you all know Doug. I also wanted to point out Cameron Turner, if he's still here. Cameron oversees the division that handles our ag conservation loans and grants. Also, Lauren Graver, my chief of staff, is here. We're a relatively small agency. We're a little less than 300 full-time employees. But we, again, with $6 billion in evergreen bonding authority in hand, and of course, a state water plan that shows us a tremendous amount of need around the state, we find ways to stay busy. I mentioned the fact that our board really is not, as I say, generally speaking, it's not as well known as some other agencies. A lot of sort of recent history with the drought and what's been going on in the Texas legislature, a lot more attention has been drawn to our agency in particular over the last couple of years. And it really is what led to some significant changes at the board that came about through legislation last session, that's House Bill 4. I want to touch on just a few things that House Bill 4 did. I'm sure some of you will recall back in November, Proposition 6 was a proposition that was on the November ballot that provided for some money, $2 billion, to be moved into a new fund to go towards water projects. But going back to sort of how that all came to be, it didn't really happen overnight. Just the idea of throwing a bunch of money at water projects in the state water plan. I mentioned the fact that in my prior roles in from my professional life, I spend a lot of time in the Capitol, and I can tell you, just going back over several legislative sessions, there was an effort by many to try to put some real some teeth into the state water plan. We've had this plan that Doug talked about, generally House put together. The planning process goes back to Senate Bill 1 in 1997, and if some have been critical about that process in the sense that, well, we get together every 5 years, we put together a plan, but the plan itself is a list of projects. So then what? How do we actually take these projects from being identified and placed in this plan, in this document, and actually getting them developed and bringing them to life? So there have been discussions over many previous sessions about coming up with some sort of funding mechanism tied to the state water plan, dedicate 2 projects in the state water plan. When you go back to 2011, that legislative session, and of course, in recent political history in the Capitol, I'd say our legislators have been generally adverse to increasing taxes and fees, which I suspect many of us, many of you in this room would agree with or support in general. So to give you an idea of what that meant in 2011, specific to water, there was a bill in the House Natural Resources that was trying to come up with a dedicated funding fee that would go towards projects in the state water plan. And it would try to raise the type of $2 billion number that we're talking about that has since occurred. And basically what that legislation looked like, they were going to come up with a user fee that could be attached to any residential water bill or commercial user's water bill. And what it would mean in theory to the average consumer of water in the state, the average residential user's water bill, the effect would have been 30 cents a month, so less than a cent a day. They could have raised a couple $1 billion to then be able to leverage and put towards projects in the state water plan. That bill went nowhere. The idea of a fee going towards water had no legs whatsoever. And while it made it out of the House committee, it never even made it to the House floor for a vote, let alone get over to the Senate side or move anywhere. So that was 2011. Of course, our legislature meets every other year, January to June. So we know now, of course, 2011 became what we know now is the worst one-year drought in recorded Texas history. And I always kind of wondered, well, if it had been 2010 when that happened, what would the legislature have done when they were there in 2011? Because it got to be a pretty scary situation in a number of ways in certain parts of the state. So fast forward 2 years later, we went from the idea of 1 cent a day, the effect of that on the residential user's water bill, to all at once, $2 billion from the state's rainy day fund. Of course, it went to the voters first, it was Proposition 6. $2 billion that's gone from the state's rainy day fund into a new fund that we refer to as SWIFT, State Water Implementation Fund of Texas. That's where it is currently, and we're going to be able, as a board, to be able to tap into it starting next year. I'm going to get to that here in just a minute. So, what happened? It was a drought, obviously. It was 2011. It was where we were. We found ourselves in late 2011 when we had not just small towns and cities in different parts of the state that literally were running out of water or had run out of water. But we were on the verge of what my boss at the time at the Brazos River Authority would call the significant emotional event. It's going to make us all think about water differently. We were very, very close to it in my world of the BRA. For those of y'all who may know about the Brazos River Authority, or familiar with it, BRA has 700,000 or so acres of surface rights that has permitted by TCEQ that reside in a system of 11 reservoirs in the Brazos Basin. They sell most of the water sold to cities as municipal supply for Temple, it goes all the way down to the lower Brazos. Dow Chemicals, a customer, for example. And Lake Georgetown is one of those 11 reservoirs. And the cities of Round Rock and Georgetown and Williamson County, actually, that's where their water comes from. It's sold to them from the BRA. And the way the transmission in the system works, actually the water in Lake Georgetown actually generally comes from Lake Stillhouse Hollow. It's a bigger lake, a bigger reservoir further north that moves water in Georgetown that then supplies those cities, you mentioned Round Rock and Georgetown. Well, we had an interruption in that transmission line in October of 2011, right in the worst of it, especially in Central Texas. And we had to pull those customer cities together and say, here's the deal. If you don't slow it down, If you were going to continue to take water out of this lake at the rate that you're using it today, you would be out of water in 30 days. And we're not talking about Robert Lee or some towns that had that same similar, if not worse, emergency situation for them, that they felt it was very real for them in that area. We're talking about Williamson County, one of the fastest growing counties, not only in the state, but in Texas, but in the country at that point in time. And I can tell you that very much got the attention of the Texas legislature. And the idea of what kind of an economic development story is that going to be, or how is that going to be turned against us as a state when we have these large growth areas just run out of water? What does that mean? Well, what happened when the DRA told those cities they needed to slow it down was the rate of water that was being pulled from that lake at that point in time was about 50 million gallons a day. Overnight, when those cities implemented their highest, most restrictive water restrictions, the usage went from 50 million gallons a day to 15 million gallons a day. And I'll tell you, I think that ag gets a little bit of an unfair knock in the conversation of who's using all the water. We know that as a percentage, when you're looking at the state water plan, most of the water is used by ag currently. And Doug showed a chart that shows how that's going to go down over time and how municipal's going to catch up. But I'll tell you, what was going on, as you would probably suspect, and why it went from 50 MGD to 15 MGD was water that was just being thrown on to St. Augustine lawns in Round Rock and Georgetown and across Williamson County. And that, it's frustrating to think about when we talk about water conservation. But that's a scenario that it's not unique to Williamson County. I'm sure it's played out all over the state in different areas. But that's what we were up against in 2011, and I really think that was a big part of why the legislature did go forth, pass House Bill 4, that allowed for Prop 6 to be on the ballot. So what is Prop 6? Prop 6, again, allowed for the $2 billion in the SWIFT fund. What does that mean? We have this money is there, is already currently being invested by the Texas Safekeeping Trust. It's a trust company that's overseen by our state's comptroller's office. That $2 billion is tied to, number one, projects identified in the state water plan. That's the first place to look for any entity, political subdivision, possibly a nonprofit water supply corporation that would be eligible to apply for and receive financial assistance from SWIFT. Where we are in time right now, as far as when we're going to be able to utilize that and use that money, March 1st of 2015 was the date set forth in the legislation. That's the first date when we're going to be able to make a disbursement. That means the water board can take cash from the SWIFT, and the way we're going to be able to use it is basically we're going to be able to put that money towards our existing loans and programs to make what is already very cost-effective and cheap financing even better and cheaper. I had a slide up earlier that had the scenario of buying interest rates down to 50% on what's already cheap money. Also, being able to be flexible with terms, deferring principal and interest, things of that nature. That what we hear from water providers is that's the type of subsidy that they think is what's going to get them to get those projects off of the plan and come into fruition. The House Bill 4 directed us as a board to go through a formal rulemaking process, which is going on right now. The rules themselves are what will show you and everyone else that would be interested which projects in the state water plan are going to rank higher than others in trying to compete for this money. We suspect that there's going to be a lot more demand for the funds, and there's going to be funds available to cover that demand need. So the legislation directed us to prioritize the state water plan. That's being done first in those regional water planning groups. And then we're going to get to a point again next year where we're going to be able to access the fund. I want to direct all y'all's attention, if you are interested in having an opportunity, to go to our website, www.twdb.texas.gov, click on the SWIFT button, and get a look at the draft rule. The most important thing for y'all to be aware of when we talk about SWIFT is the fact that the legislature put language in House Bill 4 that directed that the water board should undertake to spend no less than 10% of that $2 billion fund on what's defined as agriculture and rural projects. So you might be wondering, what does that mean? Well, they're defined in the draft rule. And I've attended several regional water planning groups, including Region O, Region F, that cover large swaths of rural Texas, where the conversation has been, okay, the 10%, that's great, that money's great, and that's supported, but how is that going to affect me as a producer, farmer? Where am I going to be able to see a benefit from that? It was mentioned that the political subdivisions, nonprofit water supply corporations are those that are eligible to apply for the financing. And we've got examples of programs in-house today that was mentioned, a groundwater district that can apply for funding that they can turn around and then loan at discounted rates to producers to upgrade their equipment, which falls very much in line with what we're talking about here with CAWC as a goal. So what I'm interested in hearing from y'all, folks like you, through our rulemaking process. The draft rules are published right now, and there's a formal comment period that's running right now. We'll go through the end of this month. Is take a look at our definitions and tell us if you think it's going to work. Frankly, if you think that money, that what's defined as is rural or an ag irrigation project, for example, do you think that those definitions are sufficient, and how you read those rules, that we're going to be able to achieve the 10% directed by the legislature? I'm very interested in that. I think my two fellow board members are as well. We've been traveling around the state. Actually, yesterday we were down in San Angelo having a board meeting there, with this being the main topic on the agenda, the draft rules and inviting comments and stakeholder participation, and us putting those rules together to tell us how we're going to do it. And do you think that we're looking at it, we're going to be able to get that money out the door in the way it was intended? I mentioned the state water plan. I've been talking a lot about the financing. Again, the $2 billion in SWIFT is tied to, it's contingent upon a project being identified in the state water plan. For those of you that are not familiar with that planning process, I know we have some folks here that actually serve on regional water planning groups, and I appreciate your participation and your service on those groups. It's always been an important job. It's become even more important in this new world of us having a $2 billion fund and actually being directed to prioritize projects in those plans. I attend a lot of the regional water planning meetings around the state. I was up here at Region O for the first time, I think back in February. And what I like to do before I go into a planning meeting generally is to go back and, again, the state plan is made up of 16 regional water plans. And the latest version of the regional water plans dates 2011. And I can open these plans. The regional plans themselves are about 1,000+ pages long. They're in my office with these big binders, and they spell out the specific projects and strategies that are going to be needed for those regions to keep up with population growth and demands on a 50-year planning horizon. That's what they're tasked with doing. So I recall traveling from Houston to Lubbock. This particular trip, I've been visiting with the city of Houston about their projects, strategies, and needs looking out, and was very taken aback by the sheer amount of surface water that's available to them. They either have the water rights that are already in hand, or that they're going to be able to achieve through contracts, and being able to move water from the Trinity Basin into the San Jacinto, bring it down into Harris County. Generally speaking, when it comes to water supply, frankly, relative to other parts of the state, I'd say I view it as they're being pretty set. Their needs are going to be more along the lines of how to move around, how do we finance the transmission, for example. So I fly to Lubbock to go to Region O, and I'm looking over the Region O plan for 2011, and I'm somewhat taken aback. The largest percentage of future supply attributed to Region O, again, how are we going to get there for the next 50 years? The number one strategy was ag conservation. And I sort of asked myself, frankly, what does that mean? I mean, we know you have the Ogallala, which is a prolific aquifer. It is going to be able to take care of this area if we protect it and treat it the right way for a long time. But what exactly, when it says ag conservation in the plan, what are we talking about? After I attended that Region O meeting, I took a meeting, asked for a meeting, was fortunate took it with Rick and the folks over at TAWC. Was able to go over to Tech, sit down, learn more about the program, the project, and the types of things that the TAWC is doing. And I felt a lot better about the world, frankly, after that meeting, because I had a better understanding of what we're talking about when we're talking about ag conservation. And that a general feeling that, you know, there are ways we're going to be able to get there. And one of the, I think, most important and proud votes I've been able to take as a member of this board goes back to really early on in our tenure as a board. We came in September, and there was an agenda item before us that asked us to allow for the extending funding for TAWC. The program, which I'm sure most of you know, it's been in place since 2004. Up until October, I think there was a little over $6 million that had been appropriated, and it made it through the board to go towards the project. So basically, the question before us was, do we want to extend this project? And I'm very happy to say that I obviously voted in favor of doing so, as did my other two board members. And it was an additional $1.8 million that had been appropriated and sent to us for that purpose that we were able to do. And at the time, that particular meeting, Rick had told me about these field days, and Lauren was with me, and we said, well, we want to go. Next field day, let us know what it is, and we'd like to go check it out. And I think he probably thought I was kidding. So I'm glad that we were able to work it out, because it really was a great learning experience for me personally to get to walk around and really see these technologies, these practices, how they work, so that I can talk about them around the state to interested folks and different stakeholders. And again, I'm very proud of the vote I was able to take to extend the funding. Just sort of in closing, I've been one of our staffers at the ABC team is Dr. Robert Mace. Some of y'all that are very involved in the groundwater management world maybe know his name. He's our Deputy Executive Administrator over our Water Science and Conservation Division. And he told me I needed to read a book called The Time It Never Rained. It was written by Elton Kilmer. I'm sure many of you are familiar. Some of you probably read the book. And so I just finished it up about a week or two ago. And there was a quote that I had to take, knowing that I was going to be coming here speaking today, that I had to pull from there. Basically, to set it up, the scenario is this is the tail end of the drought record in the 1950s. And the main character for the book's name is Charlie Flagg. And he's a ranger in a town called Rio Seco near San Angelo. And it's again, sometime mid-1950s, after it's been 4 or 5 or 6 years of what we now know or refer to as the drought record. And there's a Dallas newspaper reporter that is writing a story on the drought. And it happens upon Charlie Flagg in this cafe, and he says something along the lines of, this is the reporter saying this, that it appears to the reporter that the land was so badly scarred up that even with the best of rain, it may take years for it to recover. And Charlie Flagg's response was, I'm going to paraphrase this, we've done the best we knew how, most of us. Nobody goes in there on purpose to do damage to his country. We've grazed it too hard and we've made some mistakes, but it wasn't because we meant to, it was because we just didn't know enough. We had to take some chances, and sometimes we took the wrong ones, but we've tried to do right, and we will do right when we know how. And that stuck with me, because I truly believe that that's why we have folks like TAWC, because we're going to do right when we know how. And it's a continued evolution in education and getting a better understanding of what we're going to be able to do to make sure we protect this precious resource, so that all of you can continue to prosper and live here and farm the way that you know how, and the way I'm sure most of you have for a long time, and most of you will hope to continue to do for a long time. So I hope that you will utilize us as a resource agency, as a government that is here to help, that you will call on us for anything that we can do. Again, I encourage you to get involved in the state water planning process if you're not familiar with it. I ask you to get involved, if you will, in the development of the rules on SWIFT in particular, and looking at those definitions and making sure we can figure out ways to get those monies out into the field so that they can help you and folks like you. So thank you all very much for having me today. I'm happy to answer any questions about what's going on in Austin in general, water board.